If you would, open to Ecclesiastes chapter 3. Ecclesiastes 3, we left off last week. I keep pushing the switch the wrong way. Last week we finished, we went through verse 15, but we finished with our invitation really last week on this idea that God has done all these things. He's put all these things in order that we saw in verses 2 through 8. And we saw the practical applications of those. But the whole reason that these things have been put into order and we see these cycles in life is that men should fear God. And we closed with the idea last week of course, this word fear, where we talked about how it can mean terror. It can mean fright, but it can also mean reverence or awe. And I confess to you then, and I'll do so again this week because I'm still in the same spot, that I'm uncertain as to the exact one. I'm going with this that it means both. Okay? But when we left it last week and we talked about the conclusion, we talked about fear and terror and not wanting to fall into the hands of the living God who can kill both body and soul. As we read in Matthew chapter 10, I feel like we left sort of a little bit of a loose end there in this idea of fear. And there's a reason that God wants us to fear Him. And Solomon, in another book, wrote about fear and fearing God. And as a little sidebar, and I'll do it as quickly as I can because we have a lot to cover today, is this. Generally, when you're looking at a book and you're trying to understand the book, these are basic rules of Bible study. You want to stay in that book because the book is a package. It's a unit. It's got a theme that goes all the way from beginning to end, and you look for patterns and there's a way to study it. But a lot of times when you have difficulty in finding out what a word means in one book, you try to find that same author and other books that he wrote and see how he used the words there. With the book of Ecclesiastes, it's one book that's part of what we call wisdom literature. Okay? And there are several other books in wisdom literature. Two of the other books that we look at concerning wisdom literature, the book of Proverbs, the book of Job. Of course, we have Psalms, we have Song of Solomon. Those are considered wisdom literature. But what's interesting to me is that Solomon, when you read the book of Proverbs, Solomon wrote the book of Proverbs. And as you look through the first 9 chapters of Proverbs, you'll see that he's having some speeches with his son. What son? I don't know. We can assume Rehoboam, but 700 wives and 300 concubines. Maybe it's a general letter to sons across the board. I don't know the answer to that one. But in chapter 10 of the book of Proverbs, going through chapter 29, we begin the Proverbs. And a proverb, a proverb is a simple definition. It's a short, pithy statement that teaches a general truth. Hear this now. It's a short, pithy statement that teaches a general truth. Okay? When we say a general truth, what we mean is that you read this proverb, and generally speaking, it's going to be true. All right? But it's not a hard and fast rule. Let me give you one that we're all familiar with. Okay? Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he's old, he will not depart from it. Now, there have been a lot of parents that have gone to their grave feeling guilty and thinking that they failed their children because they raised them right, but the children didn't go the way that they taught them. And unfortunately, some preachers who don't understand how Proverbs work, or those who just want to feel powerful over a group of people, whatever the reason is, have taught that, well, if your children went off bad, you raised them wrong. Well, that's not true, is it? Okay? This is a general statement. Generally speaking, the way you raise your children is the way that they're going to go. But it's not always true. In fact, Solomon tells us in this book, in the book of Ecclesiastes then, that he doesn't understand why he sees some people who are, he uses in the book of Proverbs another one. Son, seek wisdom, and you'll live a long life, a healthy life, and an honorable life. The fool doesn't do that. But how often have we seen the fool live the long life, right? And the wise, the person who lived by wisdom, die for some unknown reason at a young age. So these books work together. Proverbs gives you these general statements that are true, and Ecclesiastes and Job, I think, show you the exceptions to those rules. There's exceptions to all of those, okay? You see how they go together? But when we talk about fearing God, I can't go back and do it because the clock will not be my friend today if I do it. I would love to. But you go back and read through Proverbs, okay? And you'll find at the very beginning, chapter 1, what we read is this: the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Now, in the book of Proverbs, another little side note, man, I get lots of side notes, but there's so much good here. The word knowledge, the word discernment, the word wisdom, the word understanding, those are 4 words that are woven together in the book of Proverbs that you can't separate. I could just as well say the fear of the Lord is the beginning of understanding. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. In fact, in chapter 9, he says those very words. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Why did I mention this? I mention this because when we see that God wants us to fear Him, there's a reason for it. He wants us to fear Him because He wants us to know Him. He wants us to have a relationship with Him. And when we come to fear the Lord the way that He wants us to, that's the beginning of a relationship with Him. That's the beginning of how we go get knowledge, how we get wisdom. And remember again, when we're talking about wisdom here, we don't use the standard answer that if I were to ask you, ask a high school kid or anyone, tell me what wisdom is. We're going to say, well, wisdom is the proper application of knowledge. Well, that's a basic ground level view. When we're talking about wisdom in the scriptures, okay? Wisdom in the scriptures, especially in the wisdom literature, wisdom is seeing things the way God sees things. That's how we started this, right? This is how we started this in Ecclesiastes. We want to see things, when we're looking at the world, we want to see the world the way God sees the world. If we don't see it the way God sees the world, then we're going to end up feeling like Solomon said in chapters 1 and 2, and some of the things that we're going to see today under the sun. You with me? Okay? So we want to see things the way God wants us to see things. Or we want to see things the way God sees them. Okay? We see them the way He sees them, then we see them correctly. And that's not always going to be something that you physically see, right? We've got to have filters on. That's why I say, and I'll repeat it over and over, and I do so without apology because I want to beat it into us. I beat it into me. Really, that's what I'm trying to do. Is I've got to put on Bible glasses and look out and see the world, because it looks like one thing, but in reality, it's another. It's another, and the only way to see it right is to see it through God's wisdom. See it how He wants us to see it. So, we get to a thing that I think will touch most of us. Here in verse 16. Solomon continues this about what he's seen. And he says, furthermore, verse 16, I have seen under the sun that in the place of justice, there's what? Wickedness. Wow, that's a surprise. And in the place of righteousness, there is wickedness. He says this in a different way. Look at chapter 4 and verse 1. Then I looked again, and I'm sort of combining these for time's sake to get our message here. But then I looked again, chapter 4 and verse 1, at all the acts of oppression which were being done where? Under the sun. Right? Same place for everybody. And behold, I saw the tears of the oppressed, that they had no one to comfort them. And on the side of their oppressors was power, but they had no one to comfort them. It trickles down. Look at verse 4, the first part of verse 4, chapter 4. I have seen that every labor or every work and every skill which is done is the result of envy or rivalry between a man and his neighbor. These things are looking rough, aren't they? Sounds bad. Solomon's witnessed these things. This is what he sees. And so as we think about this idea that he's seen under the sun that in the place of justice there is wickedness. So as Solomon observes, there's supposed to be places where there are officials put in office, people who are in authority, and these are people that the poor and the citizens look to, because when something wrong happens or a law is violated, then we're supposed to be able to go to those who are in power, and we're supposed to be able to get justice there. And Solomon says, I'm looking and I'm not seeing that. You know, it's interesting to me when I think about it. I think about how much did Solomon know about his own dad? And how he had an older brother, right? Solomon had an older brother that died at birth. Why did that happen? Because his dad decided that he would take a prolonged look at a woman who was taking a bath, and he couldn't turn it off. Had her come over, committed adultery with her, another man's wife. This child was the result. What to do? How are we going to hide this thing? I'll get him back here, and I'll take the righteous man who's fighting for me, by the way, and I'm going to use my power as king, because he is justice, right? He's in the position of meting out justice. I'm going to use my power as king. I'm going to abuse my power as king. I'll bring him back here and have him home. Get him a little drunk, maybe. Send him home to his wife. What man after going into war is not going to go home and want to be intimate with his wife? That's going to happen. And I'll cover it up. Uriah's, he's better than that, man. He's not going to do it while his fellow soldiers are out fighting. No. What to do now? Come clean? Oh, David doesn't come clean. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take my considerable power, and I'm going to send him out to the front, and I'm going to tell my chief of staff back up at the battle line, and I'm going to make sure Uriah gets murdered. So he's murdered. Does that fit this description to you? That where there was justice, supposed to be justice, he saw wickedness? Yeah. It does to me too. And it does in the eyes of the Almighty, because he didn't get away with it, did he? He didn't. Solomon, think Solomon's guilty of the same thing he's speaking of here? He's king. He's at the top, right? 700 wives, 300 concubines. Probably not what he should be where God is concerned. Did he have those that he abused as he put in power? Yes, if you read the life of Solomon, he did that. He too was this way at times. And so this is what he sees. Where there should be justice, where people should feel safe and trust and be able to go and get justice for the wrongs that's been done to them, there's wickedness. Aren't you glad that we celebrated this July 4th and our freedom, and that we live in a country where 3,500 years removed from Solomon, that today we live in a place and in a country where this is not a problem. Where there is no wickedness in our judicial system. Yeah. Turn on the news any day of the week you choose, however you get your information. Do innocent people in our judicial system that go to our judicial system go to jail? Do guilty people get set free? Yeah. And we could probably spend some time lingering here, couldn't we? Make ourselves get worked up into a pretty good frenzy, I expect. Right? But the truth of the matter is it was before Solomon. It was before his dad. It happened and started happening in the garden, right? And it's been ever since. And it's going to be after you and I are gone. Every government, every judicial system, every place where there's supposed to be justice in the world is going to be full of wickedness, and it's going to stay that way It's going to stay that way. It's going to happen that way until there is no more, till God says enough, right? Till God says enough. But he says something interesting after talking about where there should be justice, there's wickedness. He says where there should be what? What's the next word? Righteousness, there's wickedness. Wait a second. How can that be? In Solomon's day, where was it that righteousness should be found? I think in the temple, right? He built this magnificent structure. We're at the end of Solomon's life here, and people go to the temple because they want to offer their sacrifices because they want to be right with God, and they want to serve God, and they want to please God. And it's a place of safety, right? Here's something to do, an exercise I'd encourage you to do this week. Look up. There's lots of ways to do it. Look up evil things that happened in the temple from the time of Solomon all the way through to AD 70. Now, AD 70 is when the temple was destroyed, okay, in Jerusalem. And some of those things, of course, you won't find in the Bible. But look at the evil things that happened in the place where, you remember where God said he put his name, right? This is where righteousness is, okay? And look up all the evil things that happened there. I think you'll find the atrocities that happened in the temple. Prostitution, selling things they shouldn't do. You remember when Jesus chased out the money changers, how it was really a place of commerce. It was a place where righteousness was supposed to be. Now again, we roll this forward. Where people today, they're looking for an answer to the hole that's in their life. To figure things out. To look for something and understand something that's bigger than they are, right? To give them purpose and meaning in life. And so they invest themselves into the place where righteousness should be. Only to come there sometimes and find that those who are maybe in the pulpit preaching, right? Or those who are in leadership positions, maybe elders. Or those whom they looked up to, do what? Take their confidence, hear all their deepest secrets, and then use those against them or berate them. Or you see what I'm saying? That sometimes in churches today, these things still happen, don't they? We could look at it on the grand, on the big picture outside of the body of Christ. We see this all the time. Some religious leader who has been caught doing things he ought not be doing, right? And people abandon God. I'll never be involved there. We say ignorant things, and this isn't ignorant saying. I want to be spiritual but not religious. Look, you have to be religious to be right with God. That's the book. That's another sermon. But the problem is that they see wickedness where there should be righteousness, right? It's a dark picture. Solomon sees it. Well, we can linger here some more. We don't have time. Look, if you will, at verse 18. I said to myself concerning the sons of men, God has surely tested them in order for them to see that they are but beasts. Now this starts to throw us for a loop because this language doesn't really translate. What does that mean? And why has he allowed these things to go? These things are partially a test, aren't they? Life for you and me and for everybody is a test. We don't like the idea of tests because we think we're being pushed to do something bad. That's not it. That's not it at all. It's sort of like, when your kids reach that golden age of 16 and you pass off the car keys, right? What is it? It's a test. Okay. Here's your first test. Just run down to the supermarket, get me some milk, and come straight back. 4 hours later. You with me? You failed the test, son. Keys are mine. I walked to the courthouse and got my driver's license. My mother was standing next to me and she said, okay, now it's mine. because I violated the test before I even got the stupid thing. I didn't even get to drive for a month after I got it. Life is a test. And here's what happens. When people are doing wickedness, whether it's where righteousness should be or justice should be, okay, and they're not immediately punished for it, what happens? Well, number one, they're failing the test. And number two, they think they get away with it. So what do? They go back and do it some more. In fact, if you flip over a page or so, my Bible's one page, but in chapter 8, he says this in verse 11, because sentence against an evil deed isn't executed quickly, therefore the hearts of the sons of men among them are given fully to do evil. Right? You don't get busted by it, then we think we got away with it. We're just going to keep on doing it. You know, in the mind of some, and it may appear this way, crime pays, evil pays. I'm going to keep doing it. And so he concludes by saying this, so in order for them to see that they are but beasts, what does that mean? They're like animals in this regard. They have no concept between right and wrong. You know, animals don't have any concept between right and wrong. They're just animals, right? That's the point he's trying to get across here. They continue to do evil, and they get to a point where they don't tell the difference between good or evil. They can't tell the difference. And so in that regard, they're like animals. And then he goes on with this idea. For the fate of the sons of men and the fate of beasts, it's the same. As one dies, so dies the other. Indeed, they all have the same breath, and there's no advantage for man over a beast, for all is vanity. All go to the same place, all came from the dust, and all return to the dust. Who knows that the breath of man ascends upward and the breath of the beast ascends downward to the earth? And so he continues this idea about beasts. And understand this. Solomon's not saying that we are the same as beasts in every regard. He's trying to drive home a point. When wickedness continues to go, wherever it is, and people think they get away with it, you're no different than a beast because you're not telling the difference between right and wrong. We've seen this go unrestrained in history. Think about Hitler, Nazi Germany, right? A beast. No difference between right and wrong. It's just evil. You got me? Okay? And so then he takes the comparison further concerning life. And that is this. Solomon says, there's no difference between a man and a beast. They're both going to die. They both breathe the same breath. You know, they're both drawing oxygen on the same planet, and they're both going to die. And when they both die, they're both going to go back to dust. That's where they go, okay? And then he says something interesting when you get up there in verse 21. Who knows, and by the way, this is a rhetorical question. Who knows that the breath of man ascends upward and the breath of the beast ascends downward to the earth? Who knows it? I'm not trying to be morbid. We got a dead man right here and a dead dog right here. They both just died in front of us. And we stand here and watch them. Who can look at them and say, okay, this one went up, that one went down? Who can do that? Nobody can do that. That's the point, right? Remember, we're trying to view the way the world sees it without God and how we see it with God. Okay? You with me? I see some glassed over eyes. I don't want to lose you. Okay? They're both dead. They're both going to go back to dust. And no one can tell there. Now, Solomon's going to say to us something at the end of the book. You might write down chapter 12 and verse 7 next to this, because he says that the body goes back to dust and the spirit returns to God who gave it. Okay? But if we didn't have that information, who could look and tell? Nobody can look and tell. And so in this regard, we're no different than the beast. You just die. And you just go back to dirt. That's what happens, okay? You getting happy yet? All right. So he says this then. I've seen that nothing is better. And Solomon repeats himself a lot, which is why I'm repeating myself a lot. I have seen that nothing is better than that man should be happy in his activities, for that is his lot. For who will bring him to see what will occur after him? Who's going to, after you die, who's going to bring you back to show you around and show you what's going to take place on the earth? Again, it's rhetorical. No one's going to do that. Okay? No one's going to. But how is it that he says this? And I'll try to group this all together as fast as I can for us. He says, I've seen that nothing is better than that man should be happy in his activities or his work. That's his lot. Now, he said that to us before, didn't he? Last week we looked at it. To rejoice, to eat and drink, and, have joy in your work. Okay? How am I, and many of you tomorrow, you're going to get up tomorrow and you're going to go back to work, right? And if you don't go back to work, you're going back to life, that's for sure. How am I going to get up tomorrow knowing that there's wickedness in where there should be justice, that there's wickedness where there should be the righteous, that there are those who oppress people and poor people, and that there's no comfort for those poor people, and that my neighbor does work and works because of envy. And this is really what he says in chapter 4 and verse 4 is really a picture of our business world, isn't it? It's all about outdoing the other person, right? It's we use the phrase dog eat dog. How am I going to get up tomorrow and say, okay, I'm going to rejoice knowing all this stuff is happening? Well, I think there's several things that we can read. One, we don't want to do it the way Solomon says in verses 2 and 3 of chapter 4. What does he say after he sees all these things? Verse 2, so I congratulated the dead who are already dead more than the living who are still living. You died, congratulations. You're not looking at this garbage anymore. Verse 3, better off than both of them, that is the dead, is the one who's never existed, who's never seen the evil activity that is done under the sun. And if you were never born, you did even better than being here and seeing it and dying, right? Congratulations. No life, that's the answer. Notice what he says, under the sun, right? But, you and I don't want to see it that way. And Solomon doesn't want us to see it that way. He wants us to see it the way God sees it. So what do we do? How do we go to work? What things can I employ right now to try to help me with this? First of all, when we see these things, when we see wickedness where justice should be, and when we see wickedness where righteousness should be, and when we see the oppression of the poor, Solomon says, first, don't be shocked by it. Look at chapter 5 and verse 8. And listen to the words. These are all the words that we've used from 3 and 4 today. If you see oppression of the poor, and denial of justice, and denial of righteousness in the province, do not be shocked at the sight. For one official watches over another official, and there are higher officials over them. And so when you see this is something I need to remember. Let me ask you this. Every time you see an injustice, is there something welled up within you? You're still shocked? It doesn't matter how many years you lived, you're like, man, I can't believe that. Are you for real? That this really happening? Right? Do you have that kind of reaction? Yeah. Okay. Psalm says, don't be shocked by it. Not only it's in this level of official you may be dealing with or seeing, but it goes higher, right? But those officials all have an official over them. I'll talk about that in just a moment. But the first thing I do is when I go to work tomorrow, and I think we condition ourselves. Now, I don't want to say this in the wrong way. God is a God of justice. He wants justice. He wants us to be just people and righteous people. He doesn't want to see wickedness in us, okay? But at the same time, we need to also understand that we're living in a fallen world. And when those things happen, don't be shocked by it. They're going to keep happening. Number one. Number two, how can I rejoice in it? Well, how can I go to work this way? He gives us 3 options for work. Down chapter 4. Notice option number 1 in verse 5. First of all, the fool folds his hands and consumes his own flesh. Anytime you read about the folding of hands in wisdom literature, you're talking about the lazy person. This is a lazy person who says, if you want to give me something, you're going to have to roll me over and put it in my own pocket. I ain't doing nothing. Okay? If he had any savings, which he probably doesn't, he uses all of them. And in the end, do you see the graphic language Solomon uses about the fool who says, I'm getting out of the workforce, all right? That he consumes his own flesh. That's a cannibalistic term. He's eating everything else. He ain't got nothing else, and all he's got left is the flesh on his bone. This guy's going down. So one option is when you read all this bad stuff, I'm checking out, I'm done. I'm out of the workforce. No, that's not the right answer. Option number 2. It says, one handful of rest is better than 2 fistful of labor and striving after the wind. 2 fistful of labor and striving after the wind. The next option that we look at is just get involved in the work more. Work. You notice the difference in language between the beginning of verse 6 and the second one? He says, one hand full of rest. Compared to what? 2 fists. You see it? The clenched hand, trying to hold on. The idea here is that, look, I'm going to work, and that's what I'm going to do. And we've seen people do this before, and maybe you've done it before. I'm guilty of this before, right? It comes at a cost, though, because these 2 fists that are trying to get full, and we would think, hey, two hands full are better than 1 hand full, because this is the way it is, especially in America. Bigger's better. I don't want to drive a Volkswagen. I want to drive a G-Wagon. You know, that's what I want to drive. I don't want to live in a little house. I want to live in a mansion. I don't want to have a little bank account. I want to have a big fat bank account. Everything's bigger and better. If it's not bigger, it's not better. That's what we're taught here, isn't it? Yeah. But it comes at a cost. You see, the 2 fists here are nothing but labor and work. There's no rest with this. There's no rest that's provided. There's only striving. And what does he say the end result is that way? You're going to end up with 2 fistful of what? Labor and wind. In the end, you're going to end up with 2 hands full of wind. Nothing. Right? So how should I work? I need to be this one at the beginning of verse 6. 1 handful of quiet or rest is better than the 2 hands, right? It's better than this. And so why don't I take and look at my job and my work and relieve myself of the burden? This is one thing that I find here, and this is why it's good for me to go back to this book, because if I don't go back to it, I end up going back to being outraged and angry at the injustice in the world, and outraged and angry when I see bad things in the church, and outraged and angry when I see oppression. Look, Sean, be happy with the fact that God's putting food on your table. You're surrounded by a family, and you can go to sleep at night, and everything's taken care of by the Almighty. Instead of constantly looking elsewhere, being envious, striving for more. You see how that can be peaceful? If we'll just listen to it. If we'll just do it. We'll just put it into action. And understand this. We can do that because the third thing that we can employ. We can do this because what Solomon says in verse 17, I skipped over it on purpose. But Solomon says it right here when he says, I said to myself, God will judge both the righteous man and the wicked man for a time. There's our word, right? Where he's put all these other things in verses 2 through 8, cycles in life, when they're going to happen. There's also a time for every matter, for every deed is there. So I can go to bed knowing this. Yes, all these things are happening. And yes, God wants us to want justice, and we can cry out for justice, and we can cry out for those things. But in the end, God has the time set when he's going to do that. And it's a relief to me to say, okay, I don't have to worry about that. Yes, it's happening. Yes, I hate it. I can't stand it. But here's where I'm going to spend my joy and happiness. I'm going to eat with my family. I'm going to do my work. And I'm going to trust that God's going to take care of it someday. Doesn't that relieve you? Doesn't that make you take a deep breath and say, it's in the hands of the Almighty? It does for me. All right, I've run long. And I appreciate your attention, but I needed to get to here today. So if you have a need that we can pray for, if you're interested in obeying the gospel, I don't know where you are in your walk toward Christ, but we want to help you with that. If you need to respond to the invitation, Danny's going to lead us in this song, and you let us know, and we'll do the best we can to help you. If you would, while we stand and sing.